Have you ever wondered why your prayers sometimes feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling, never quite reaching their destination? Why, despite your sincere devotion and countless hours spent seeking divine guidance, God's voice remains mysteriously silent, or worse, drowned out by the relentless noise of daily life? What if I told you that the problem isn't with God's willingness to speak, but with where you've been taught to listen? For generations, we've been conditioned to believe that spiritual hearing requires us to reach upward, outward, beyond ourselves, as if the divine exists somewhere in a distant cosmic realm, far removed from our everyday reality. We close our eyes, fold our hands, and send our prayers into what feels like an endless void, hoping they'll somehow traverse the vast distance between earth and heaven. We strain, we plead, we beg for a sign, for clarity, for just one unmistakable word from above. Has this ever happened to you? That frustrating cycle of seeking, waiting, and wondering if anyone is actually listening on the other end. The truth is, this approach to spiritual hearing has left countless sincere seekers trapped in a perpetual state of spiritual frustration. Not because they lack faith or devotion, but because they've been looking in entirely the wrong direction. What if the veil between you and divine communication isn't nearly as thick as you've been led to believe? What if the distance you've been trying to bridge doesn't actually exist at all? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. The revolutionary shift I'm about to share with you transforms everything you've understood about prayer, spiritual guidance, and divine communication. It's not about learning new techniques or mastering complex meditation practices. It's about awakening to something that has been present all along, hidden in plain sight within your very consciousness. Scripture itself reveals something profound that many of us have overlooked. The kingdom of heaven is not a distant destination you reach after death, nor is it reserved exclusively for spiritual masters or religious elites. It exists as a state of consciousness, a living reality, right here, right now, within you. This isn't mystical theory or wishful thinking. This is the practical foundation for genuine spiritual hearing, the kind that transforms not just your prayer life, but every decision, every relationship, every challenge you face. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might fundamentally shift your entire understanding of how divine communication actually works. When you grasp that God's voice isn't something you need to search for in the heavens, but something already speaking in the stillness of your own being, everything changes. The desperate straining gives way to peaceful recognition. The anxious pleading transforms into joyful communion. The frustrating silence reveals itself as a voice that has been speaking all along. You simply needed to know where to listen. Think about the last time you were searching frantically for your phone, only to realize it was in your hand the entire time. That moment of recognition, when you stop searching and simply see what's already there, captures the essence of this transformation perfectly. Spiritual hearing works exactly the same way. The shift isn't about acquiring something new or developing a supernatural ability you don't possess. It's about recognizing what has always been present, what has been speaking to you from within since the very beginning. This recognition represents a complete reversal of everything most of us have been taught about divine communication. Instead of treating God's voice as something elusive that requires extraordinary effort to access, you begin to understand it as the natural frequency of your deepest consciousness. Always broadcasting, always available, simply waiting for you to tune in. The journey from straining to recognizing changes your entire spiritual experience. Where there was anxiety about whether you're hearing correctly, there emerges a quiet confidence. Where there was frustration about unanswered prayers, there develops an awareness of constant dialogue happening beneath the surface of your thoughts. The hidden truth behind this shift is surprisingly simple, yet its impact radiates into every corner of your life. Your decisions begin flowing from a different source. Instead of wrestling with choices through endless mental deliberation, you discover guidance arising naturally from stillness. Challenges that once triggered panic now become invitations to return to this inner awareness. Relationships transform as you perceive the same divine presence in others that you've recognized within yourself. Now, I want to go even deeper into how this actually works in your everyday experience, because understanding the concept intellectually is one thing. Living it practically is where the real transformation happens. The first step involves something so beautifully uncomplicated that many people initially dismiss it as too simple to be effective. It's the practice of presence, not as some elaborate spiritual discipline requiring hours of meditation, but as brief moments of recognition woven throughout your ordinary day. Subscribe to continue this journey with me. Each video explores practical ways to deepen your spiritual hearing and recognize divine guidance in everyday life. Imagine waking tomorrow morning, and before your feet even touch the floor, before you check your phone or mentally rehearse your to-do list, you pause for just a breath and acknowledge a simple truth. The kingdom of heaven is within me right now, not as a religious platitude you've memorized, but as a living reality you're choosing to recognize. This single moment creates a foundation for everything that follows. It's like tuning an instrument before playing. It sets the frequency for your entire day. The beauty of this practice is how it integrates seamlessly into your existing routine. You're driving to work, sitting in traffic that would normally trigger frustration, and you take 3 seconds to return to this. Awareness. You're in a tense meeting, feeling pressure mounting, and you pause internally to recognize the divine presence that exists beyond the material circumstances. You're preparing dinner, hands busy with mundane tasks, and you notice the sacred opportunity hidden within this ordinary moment. These aren't interruptions to your day. They're revelations of what your day has always been beneath the surface of appearances. Behind the scenes of this simple practice, something profound is taking place. Each recognition, no matter how brief, is adjusting your spiritual receptors, fine-tuning your ability to perceive guidance that's already flowing. You're not creating communication with the divine, you're removing the static that prevented you from hearing what was always there. If you've ever experienced even a fleeting moment where this kind of inner recognition brought unexpected clarity or peace, write in the comments, "I've felt this stillness." What most people miss entirely is that spiritual transformation doesn't follow the same rules as our achievement-oriented culture. We've been trained to believe that bigger efforts produce bigger results, that intensity equals effectiveness, that dramatic spiritual experiences are what create lasting change. But the hidden truth works in exactly the opposite way. The person who spends 5 minutes each morning recognizing divine presence within will experience far deeper transformation than someone who occasionally dedicates entire weekends to intensive spiritual retreats, only to return to complete unconsciousness the rest of the month. This revelation contradicts almost everything our culture teaches us about success and progress. We want the quick fix, the breakthrough moment, the sudden enlightenment that changes everything overnight. But spiritual hearing develops more like learning a language or building physical strength through consistent, gentle repetition that gradually rewires your consciousness at the deepest levels. Think of it as the difference between watering a plant with a small cup every day versus flooding it with a fire hose once a month. The daily attention creates sustainable growth, while the occasional deluge either overwhelms or gets absorbed without lasting impact. The beauty of this approach is how it removes the pressure to have profound spiritual experiences every time you turn inward. Some moments of recognition will feel deeply meaningful, filled with clarity and peace. Others will feel mechanical, routine, almost empty. Both are equally valuable because both are creating the neural pathways, the spiritual muscle memory that allows divine guidance to flow more naturally through your awareness. Your consistency is doing the work even when you don't feel immediate results. Now I want to show you how this practice of stillness becomes especially powerful in one of life's most challenging arenas, your physical health. When symptoms appear in your body, whether it's a persistent headache, chronic pain, or something more serious, notice what happens in your consciousness. The immediate reaction for most of us involves fear that quickly spirals into panic. We become completely identified with the physical condition, consumed by worst-case scenarios, desperately seeking solutions while our minds race with anxiety about outcomes. This fear-based reaction creates so much noise in your consciousness that hearing any divine guidance becomes virtually impossible. It's like trying to have a quiet conversation in the middle of a thunderstorm. The second shift in awakening spiritual hearing involves transforming your relationship with health challenges entirely. Before you react, before you allow fear to dominate your awareness, you turn within to recognize a deeper truth. In the kingdom of heaven that exists within your consciousness right now, there is only wholeness, only divine perfection. This doesn't mean denying physical symptoms or refusing medical care. It means creating space where God's voice can actually be heard clearly about your well-being. When you approach health from this transformed awareness, something remarkable happens. The panic subsides enough that you can receive genuine guidance about what steps to take. You make decisions from clarity rather than fear. You seek appropriate medical wisdom when needed, but you're not consumed by anxiety about diagnoses or prognoses. Behind the scenes, this inner stillness is creating the optimal conditions for your body's natural healing intelligence to function, while simultaneously opening channels of divine communication that were previously blocked by stress and worry. If this approach to health challenges resonates with something you've experienced or needed to hear, write in the comments, stillness before reaction. There's a critical distinction here that changes everything about how you navigate health challenges, or any challenge for that matter. Turning inward to recognize divine wholeness doesn't mean abandoning common sense or rejecting the practical wisdom that medical science offers. It's not an either-or decision between spiritual awareness and appropriate action. The transformation happens when you integrate both, allowing them to work together rather than treating them as opposing forces. The pivotal decision point you face in any health situation isn't whether to seek medical care or rely solely on spiritual practice. It's much simpler and more profound than that. Will you react from fear or respond from spiritual awareness? When you react from fear, your decisions become frantic, scattered, desperate. You might seek multiple opinions without ever finding peace, or you might freeze entirely, paralyzed by anxiety about what to do next. But when you respond from spiritual awareness, when you first turn inward to recognize the kingdom of heaven within you, you create the mental and emotional space where divine guidance can actually flow. And to that space, you hear clearly whether to seek medical attention, what questions to ask, which practitioner to consult, what treatment aligns with your body's needs. This integration of spiritual clarity and practical wisdom produces decisions that feel right at the deepest level, not because you're following a formula, but because you're accessing intelligence that transcends both purely material thinking and disconnected spiritual idealism. The impact of this approach extends far beyond health, into every dimension of your life, where fear typically drowns out divine communication. Now, I want to explore perhaps the most emotionally charged arena where this same principle creates dramatic transformation: your relationship with money. Financial concerns have an almost unparalleled ability to trigger our deepest survival fears. When unexpected bills arrive, when income drops, when the economy becomes uncertain, notice what happens in your consciousness. The anxiety can be overwhelming, creating such intense static that hearing any divine guidance about provision becomes nearly impossible. Here's the hidden truth that most teachings about prosperity completely miss. Financial freedom has very little to do with the actual numbers in your bank account and everything to do with the awareness operating in your consciousness. From the kingdom perspective, from the recognition that divine substance is infinite and omnipresent, you begin to understand that your experience of supply is primarily a reflection of your consciousness, not a result of external economic conditions. This revelation doesn't mean ignoring practical financial planning or pretending bills don't exist. It means approaching your finances from an entirely different foundation. When you operate from scarcity consciousness, every financial decision becomes a battlefield of fear. You grip tightly to what you have, suspicious of loss, anxious about the future, making choices from desperation rather than wisdom. But when you recognize the kingdom within, when you turn inward to access the awareness that divine provision is already present in your consciousness, the journey toward financial decisions transforms completely. Behind the scenes, this shift in awareness opens channels for guidance, opportunities, and solutions that were literally invisible to scarcity-based thinking. If you've noticed how your mindset about money affects what actually shows up in your experience, write in the comments. Consciousness creates supply. The practical application of this transformed consciousness shows up most clearly in how you respond when financial pressure hits. That unexpected car repair bill arrives, or a client cancels a contract, or you receive news that your hours are being reduced. In those moments, you have a choice point that determines everything that follows. The old pattern would be immediate panic, mental catastrophizing about worst-case scenarios, frantic searching for solutions, while your mind spins in anxiety. But from this new awareness, your first response becomes something entirely different. You turn inward to recognize that God's voice speaks guidance even in this exact circumstance. This shift doesn't mean sitting passively and waiting for money to magically appear. It means approaching every financial decision as an opportunity to hear divine wisdom rather than treating it as a crisis that needs immediate reactive solutions. You still create budgets, you still plan responsibly, you still take practical action. The transformation is in the quality of presence you bring to these activities. Where there was emotional reactivity that clouded your judgment, there emerges clarity. Where there was grasping and desperate energy that actually repelled opportunities, there develops a quiet confidence that attracts unexpected solutions. Behind the scenes of this inner work, you'll notice doors opening that weren't visible before, conversations leading to possibilities you hadn't considered, timing that seems almost miraculous but is actually the natural result of consciousness aligned with divine guidance. If this resonated with you, tap that like button, not for algorithms, but as a quiet acknowledgement that this conversation mattered and spiritual truth still transforms lives. Now, I want to reveal how this same principle of inner stillness creates perhaps its most powerful impact in the area of life that causes more confusion and pain than almost any other: your relationships with people. Think about your closest connections for a moment. How often do interactions with family, romantic partners, friends, or colleagues become the exact places where hearing divine guidance feels most impossible? There's a hidden dynamic at work here that most people never recognize. We approach relationships with unconscious agendas, seeking validation to prove our worth, security to ease our fears, fulfillment to fill our inner emptiness. These emotional needs and expectations create such thick clouds around our spiritual receptors that perceiving any divine guidance through the relationship becomes nearly impossible. You're so focused on what you need from the other person, so reactive to whether they're meeting those needs or disappointing you, that the still, small voice within gets completely drowned out by emotional noise. The fourth shift in awakening spiritual hearing transforms this entire relational landscape. When you recognize divine presence within yourself first, when you turn inward to acknowledge the kingdom of heaven in your own consciousness, something remarkable happens. You naturally begin perceiving that same divine presence in others as well. This recognition doesn't make relationship challenges disappear or turn difficult people into easy ones. What it does is provide an entirely different foundation for navigating every interaction. Instead of approaching conversations as battles to win or performances to execute perfectly, you encounter them as opportunities to witness divine truth expressing itself through human experience. If you've discovered that your relationships transform when you first find stillness within yourself, write in the comments, "Inner peace changes everything." The practical power of this awareness reveals itself in those precise moments when relationships become most challenging. Your spouse makes a cutting remark that hits a vulnerable spot, or a friend cancels plans for the third time, leaving you feeling unimportant. In those instances, your habitual response is immediate: defensiveness, hurt, withdrawal, retaliation. But when you've been practicing the recognition of divine presence within yourself, something different becomes possible. You pause, even for just a breath, and turn inward to acknowledge the kingdom of heaven in your own consciousness. This creates a sacred moment between trigger and response, where you can actually hear guidance that transcends the emotional reaction. In that space of stillness, revelations emerge that were completely invisible to your reactive mind. You might see the pain behind your spouse's words, rather than just the attack. You might recognize your friend's cancellation as reflecting their own struggle, rather than a statement about your worth. You might hear divine wisdom about setting boundaries or speaking truth with compassion. The catalyst for relationship transformation isn't finding perfect people who never hurt or disappoint you. It's developing this capacity for perfect listening, where you begin hearing God's voice speaking through even the most difficult interactions. Behind the scenes of every healthy relationship is this ability to pause, return to inner awareness, and respond from spiritual clarity rather than emotional reactivity. Now, I want to show you how this same practice of stillness creates transformation in what might be the most spiritually neglected arena of daily life, your work. For so many people, professional environments feel like spiritual dead zones where divine guidance seems not just difficult, but impossible to access. The pressure of deadlines turns every project into a survival test. Office politics create constant anxiety about perception and positioning. Performance expectations generate a frequency of stress that completely drowns out the still small voice within. You might have a rich spiritual life at home, but the moment you step into your workplace, it's as if you enter a different dimension where all that awareness evaporates. The fifth shift in awakening spiritual hearing revolutionizes this entire experience by transforming work from mere employment, something you endure to pay bills, into spiritual expression. This doesn't mean quitting your job to become a minister or only working in explicitly spiritual fields. It means recognizing divine reality beyond material appearances, even in the most mundane or challenging workplace situations. When a project deadline triggers your usual anxiety, you pause to acknowledge the kingdom within, creating space where divine ideas can actually flow. When a difficult colleague interaction arises, you recognize the opportunity to witness spiritual truth operating through human dynamics. The journey of your workday becomes something entirely different when approached from this consciousness. Not easier necessarily, but infused with meaning and guidance that was always present, but previously unrecognized. If you've experienced moments where bringing inner stillness to work situations created unexpected breakthroughs, write in the comments, "Presence transforms work." The hidden truth about creativity and problem solving that most productivity experts completely miss is this: the most groundbreaking solutions, the most innovative ideas, the breakthroughs that seem to come out of nowhere, they rarely emerge from stressed, constricted consciousness. You can't force creative intelligence through sheer mental effort or willpower, but when you access the unlimited intelligence that speaks within kingdom awareness, ideas flow with a naturalness that feels almost effortless. That impossible project deadline that once triggered days of anxiety becomes something entirely different when approached from stillness. You turn inward, recognize divine presence, and suddenly solutions appear that your stressed mind could never have generated. Insights arrive with perfect timing. Resources materialize unexpectedly. Collaborations form organically. The same transformation happens with difficult colleague interactions. Instead of perceiving them as obstacles to endure or battles to win, you begin seeing them as opportunities to witness the kingdom expressing itself through human dynamics. When you recognize divine presence within yourself before the meeting, you naturally perceive it operating in the other person as well, even when they're being challenging. This doesn't make you passive or ineffective. It makes you extraordinarily perceptive, able to hear guidance about how to communicate, when to speak, when to listen, what the real issue is beneath the surface conflict. Behind the scenes of every truly successful professional journey is this capacity to access intelligence beyond the limitations of anxious, reactive thinking. Now, I want to reveal what might be the most precious discovery on this entire journey of awakening spiritual hearing. As kingdom consciousness matures through your consistent practice, through those daily moments of recognition, through turning inward before reacting, through acknowledging divine presence in ordinary situations, you begin to experience something that changes everything about how you move through life. It's an unshakable peace that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect or problems being solved. This isn't the superficial positivity that pretends everything is fine when it clearly isn't. It's not emotional bypassing that refuses to acknowledge real challenges or genuine pain. It's authentic spiritual awareness that remains steady through life's inevitable fluctuations. The revelation here goes deeper than most people realize. When you position yourself to hear God's voice clearly through these practices of stillness and recognition, what you discover isn't just guidance about specific decisions, though that certainly comes. What emerges is a foundational frequency of tranquility that transcends any particular situation. Financial setbacks still require practical response, but they don't trigger the same panic. Relationship difficulties still need to be addressed, but they don't consume you with emotional drama. Health concerns still warrant appropriate care, but they don't dominate your consciousness with fear. The impact of this inner peace radiates into every decision, every interaction, every challenge you face. If you've glimpsed this quality of peace that exists beyond circumstances, write in the comments, "I've touched this stillness." Now I want to be completely honest with you about what this journey actually requires, because the hidden truth here might be challenging to hear in our culture of instant gratification and quick fixes. The pathway to this transformation demands something that most spiritual seekers are unwilling to give: consistent commitment regardless of immediate results. This isn't a weekend workshop that produces instant enlightenment. It's not a 21-day challenge that guarantees dramatic breakthroughs. The real transformation unfolds through daily practice, even when you feel absolutely no immediate effects. Through faith in spiritual truth, when material appearances seem to contradict it completely. Through patience during what can be a painfully gradual development process. Some people begin this practice and experience noticeable shifts within weeks. Others work diligently for months or even years before significant changes become visible in their external circumstances. The decisive factor isn't spiritual talent or divine favoritism. It's simple persistence, the willingness to continue recognizing truth regardless of apparent results. Think about any meaningful transformation you've experienced in your life. Did it happen overnight? Real change, the kind that reshapes your entire experience, almost always unfolds through consistent small adjustments rather than singular dramatic events. Spiritual hearing follows this same developmental pattern, gradually tuning your consciousness to divine frequency with increasing precision through repetition and dedication. The mindset shift that makes this sustainable involves embracing what modern culture rejects entirely, the wisdom of patient unfolding. We've been conditioned to expect immediate downloads, same-day delivery, instant results in virtually every domain. When we bring these same expectations to spiritual practice, wanting instant clarity or immediate healing, we set ourselves up for disappointment and abandonment of the very practices that would produce lasting transformation if given time to work. Now, I want to offer you perhaps the most liberating revelation of this entire journey. You can begin right now, exactly where you are, with whatever understanding you currently possess. The path to hearing God's voice more clearly doesn't require prerequisites or spiritual credentials. You don't need to master complex theology first. You don't need years of meditation experience or advanced spiritual status. You don't need to fix yourself or become someone different. The kingdom of heaven is within you at this very moment. It has always been there, and it will always be there. This truth contradicts so much of our conventional spiritual programming that tells us we need elaborate preparation or special training before we're worthy of divine communication. The blueprint for transformation isn't about adding something new to your life through tremendous effort. It's about removing the barriers to what already exists eternally within your consciousness. You can start today, right now, with your very next breath, by recognizing as often as you remember throughout your day, the kingdom of heaven is within me now. Divine presence is my true nature. Spiritual guidance is speaking within my consciousness, regardless of external appearances. If you're ready to begin this practice today, exactly as you are, write in the comments, "I'm starting now." If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, it tells me something important about you. You're genuinely seeking a deeper connection with divine guidance, not just collecting spiritual information. That distinction matters. The practices we've explored today aren't theoretical concepts to admire from a distance. They're living invitations to transform how you experience every moment of your life. If this message resonated with something true in your heart, if you felt that quiet recognition of, yes, this is what I've been searching for, I'd love to continue exploring these pathways with you. Subscribe to join this community of seekers who are discovering that spiritual hearing isn't reserved for mystics or saints. It's your natural birthright, waiting to be recognized. Each video I create is designed to translate profound spiritual truth into practical steps you can implement immediately, right where you are. And if you made it all the way to this moment with me, write in the comments, "This message found me." Your words might be exactly what another person needs to see to begin their own practice of stillness and recognition. Consider tapping that like button as well. Not for algorithms or metrics, but as a quiet acknowledgement between us that this conversation mattered, that spiritual truth still has the power to transform lives in our distracted, noise-filled world. There's a video right here that explores how to maintain this awareness of divine presence, even when life becomes chaotic and circumstances seem overwhelming. It's a perfect continuation of what we've discovered today. Click and continue with me over there, and let's go deeper together into the practice of hearing God speak through stillness. Until we meet again, remember, the kingdom of heaven is within you right now, and divine guidance is already speaking. You simply need to recognize what has always been there. Beloved, the presence of God is not something to be summoned or persuaded. It is here, always here, flowing as the very essence of your being. Yet how often we build walls within ourselves and then cry out that we are separate from the source. The infinite river of divine energy never stops its movement. It is only our resistance, our self-made dams, that keep it from entering consciousness. To stop blocking God's flow, the first step is silence. Be still, not as one seeking reward, but as one resting in trust. When thought ceases its restless motion, the eternal whisper of spirit becomes audible. The noise of desire and fear must subside, for God's current is delicate. It cannot be heard above the roar of human will. Second, release judgment. Every criticism, every resentment, every lingering sense of unworthiness creates density in the soul. As light cannot enter a closed room, divine love cannot inhabit a heart filled with judgment. Forgive, not for another's sake, but that you may dissolve the shadow that hides the presence from your sight. Third, surrender control. Stop trying to shape life according to your plans and definitions. The divine intelligence knows what you need before you could name it. When you cease directing the flow, you discover it has been guiding you all along. Fourth, cultivate gratitude, not as a mental exercise, but as a recognition of truth. Gratitude affirms that the source is already pouring forth. It shifts awareness from what seems lacking to what eternally is, and in that acknowledgement, abundance expands naturally. Fifth, live in awareness. The presence is not an experience you have and lose. It is the fabric of existence itself. Train your perception to rest in the now. Each moment becomes a sacred revelation when you stop reaching into the future or clinging to the past. Do not strive to find God. Strive to remove that which hides God from your sight. The kingdom is not distant. It is the consciousness of divine flow realized. When you no longer block it with fear, control, or resistance, you will see that the river was never outside you. It was always your own life unfolding in perfect, infinite grace. Here are 5 keynotes capturing the essence of the speech. How to stop blocking God's flow. 5 steps to let divine energy in. The presence is already here. God's flow never stops. Only human resistance and self-created barriers prevent us from experiencing it. Silence opens the channel. Inner stillness and the quieting of thought allow the whisper of divine energy to be heard and felt. Let go of judgment and control, releasing criticism, resentment, and the need to manage life clears the path for divine intelligence to act freely. Gratitude aligns with the flow. True gratitude acknowledges the abundance already present, shifting awareness from lack to divine sufficiency. Live in present awareness. The flow of God is realized in the now. By resting in the present moment, life becomes a continuous revelation of grace. The presence is already here. It does not come and go like sunlight behind clouds. It is the eternal radiance that never ceases to shine. What changes is not God's activity, but our awareness of it. Imagine standing before a great river that flows endlessly, crystal and alive, and yet you keep your cup turned upside down, wondering why it remains empty. The river is not withholding itself, it is your positioning that prevents the filling. So it is with divine flow. The energy, intelligence, and love of God are ceaselessly moving through all creation, but when the mind is fixed on fear, separation, or striving, it cannot receive what is already present. To recognize that God's flow is ever present is to shift from a life of seeking to a life of awakening. The human mind often believes that it must earn grace, summon power through effort, or attract divine favor through ritual and repetition. Yet these are the very acts that keep us from realizing the truth there is nothing to attract, because the source has never been apart from its expression. Just as the ocean does not need to chase its waves, you do not need to chase the presence. You need only to awaken to it, to know that every breath you take, every heartbeat that moves in you, is the rhythm of divine life expressing itself. The blockage of God's flow happens when we place our faith in appearances. We believe in lack, we identify with limitation, and we bow before the noise of circumstance. Every time we declare, "I am not enough, life is unfair," or "things are against me," we reinforce a false God made of thought and emotion. The real presence is untouched by any of this. It does not diminish when you are sad, nor does it increase when you are joyful. It simply is, but the awareness of it expands in proportion to your stillness and your surrender. When you cease to demand that life conform to your image of good, when you no longer insist that God show up in the way you expect, then suddenly the veil thins. You realize that every moment was filled with divine activity, but your mind was too busy trying to manage the current to notice. The work, then, is not to reach for God, but to remove the inner noise that makes you deaf to the whisper already within. As you begin to rest in this understanding, peace arises. You stop trying to fix the world and start perceiving it as the living body of spirit. You no longer seek miracles. You see that life itself is the miracle. The presence becomes not a distant deity, but the pulse of being that sustains every atom, every leaf, every soul. To live in that awareness is to flow effortlessly with divine energy, to be carried rather than to carry yourself. In truth, there is no separation to overcome. There is only a veil of thought to dissolve. When that veil lifts, when even for an instant you glimpse the eternal presence that is both within and around you, you know the truth of freedom, that God's flow was never absent. It is the life you are, living, the breath you are breathing, and the consciousness through which you behold it all. Silence opens the channel through which divine energy flows freely into awareness. The human mind is often crowded with thoughts that compete for attention, worries, plans, regrets, and judgments, and in this constant noise, the soft voice of spirit is drowned out. It is not that God is absent, but that the mind is too occupied with its own echoes to perceive the still presence beneath them. Silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is the presence of receptivity, the inner quiet that allows the divine rhythm to be heard. When one learns to enter this silence, not through strain or effort, but through surrender, the flow of divine energy becomes as natural as breathing. The sacred quiet is not found by isolating oneself from the world, but by withdrawing attention from its turbulence. The stillness of spirit exists even in the midst of movement, and the one who learns to rest inwardly amid outer noise discovers that peace is not dependent on circumstance. It is an inner state, a sanctuary always available, waiting only to be entered. To enter it, one must cease striving, cease asking, pleading, and demanding that God speak, and instead listen with the heart. True listening is not an act of will but of surrender, an openness that expects nothing yet receives all. When silence is practiced sincerely, the mind begins to slow its spinning. Thoughts arise, but they no longer carry authority. Feelings pass, but they no longer disturb the surface of consciousness. In this quiet awareness, the divine presence makes itself known, not as words, not as visions, but as an unmistakable peace that fills every corner of being. It is as if an invisible current begins to move through you, uniting your breath, your heartbeat, and your perception with something vast and timeless. In silence, the illusion of separation starts to dissolve. You no longer perceive yourself as a body trying to reach a distant God. Instead, you sense that you are part of the same infinite stillness that sustains the stars. The walls of individuality grow transparent, and through them the light of divine awareness shines effortlessly. This is the state in which inspiration, guidance, and healing arise, not because you summoned them, but because you finally stopped resisting their natural arrival. Silence reveals the futility of noise-driven spirituality. Many believe they must speak words of affirmation or perform rituals to bring divine help closer, yet these are often acts of fear disguised as devotion. The presence cannot be invoked by sound, it is realized in quiet recognition. When you stop trying to make something happen, you create the space in which the eternal movement of God can express itself through you. The less you do, the more you are acted upon by the unseen intelligence that governs all creation. Even a few moments of deep silence each day begin to change the texture of life. The mind grows softer, reactions become slower, and the heart becomes more transparent. What once provoked anxiety now passes like wind through open space. The inner calm starts to radiate outward, touching the environment and those around you. Without speaking a word, you become a conduit for peace, and through you, the divine energy flows unimpeded. This silence is not an escape from life, but a return to the essence of life itself. It is the state in which divine energy meets human awareness and merges as one. When you live from this quiet center, words, actions, and thoughts arise spontaneously from a place of perfect alignment. You no longer seek to control outcomes because the presence within guides every step. And though the world may remain noisy, your spirit abides in unshakable stillness, through which the eternal current of God continues its effortless, unbroken flow. Letting go of judgment and control is the quiet act of returning to harmony with the divine order that already governs life perfectly. The human mind clings to its opinions, its fears, and its preferences, believing that by controlling outcomes, it can preserve safety or happiness. Yet every attempt to control life is an act of mistrust, a declaration that the divine wisdom which sustains galaxies cannot be trusted to guide the details of our small existence. Control is resistance disguised as order. It is the mind saying, "I know better than the infinite," and in that moment, the natural flow of divine energy is obstructed. When one releases judgment, a great weight lifts. Judgment divides what God has made whole. It separates friend from enemy, success from failure, holy from unholy. Each time we judge, we step out of unity and into illusion. The divine flow cannot move freely through a divided consciousness, because it is one with all that is. To let go of judgment is to return to the awareness that everything appearing in life is part of the same sacred unfolding. What seems wrong or imperfect may be a necessary motion in the larger rhythm of divine purpose, unseen by the limited mind. When you stop labeling experiences as good or bad, you begin to see them as expressions of one vast harmony, working toward awakening. Control, too, is a subtle form of fear. It arises from the belief that if you do not hold tightly to life, it will fall apart. But life does not depend on your grip, it depends on the invisible intelligence that created it. When you release the need to manage, fix, or force, you discover that things begin to fall into place with effortless precision. The same energy that spins the planets and orchestrates the tides is capable of arranging your affairs. In surrender, you move from anxiety to trust, from striving to alignment. This surrender is not weakness, it is the deepest strength, the strength that comes from realizing that divine order is unshakable. When you stop interfering, you feel the peace that comes from knowing that you are supported by something vast and benevolent. The ego seeks control because it feels separate. The soul releases control because it remembers unity. As you live from this remembrance, you no longer react to appearances, you respond from wisdom. Decisions arise spontaneously from intuition rather than from fear. Actions flow naturally without strain or calculation. Judgment and control feed each other. We judge what we do not understand, and because of that judgment, we try to control it. The more we control, the more fear we generate, and the cycle continues. The way out is gentle awareness. When you notice judgment rising, simply see it without condemnation. Recognize it as an old habit of separation and let it dissolve in the light of understanding. When you feel the urge to control, pause and breathe. Ask yourself whether love or fear is guiding your action. In that pause, divine wisdom enters, and often what once seemed urgent loses all power. As judgment fades, compassion blooms. You begin to see others not as obstacles or threats, but as mirrors of your own unfolding. Compassion softens the heart, and in that softness, divine energy moves easily, bringing healing where rigidity once ruled. When control dissolves, space opens for grace to act. The timing of life becomes perfect. Doors open without effort, and the peace you once sought through control reveals itself as your natural state. The flow of divine energy has never been blocked by life itself. It is blocked only by the insistence of the human will. When judgment and control are released, life reveals itself as a seamless expression of divine intelligence, moving through every circumstance, guiding, healing, and transforming in silence. Gratitude is not a polite response to good fortune, it is the recognition of divine reality. It is the awareness that what we call blessings are not occasional gifts handed down from afar, but the continuous expression of God's presence in and as life itself. Gratitude is not saying thank you for what we have. It is realizing that we are inseparable from the infinite source that never ceases to give. It transforms the heart from a vessel of longing into a channel of receiving. When one lives in gratitude, lack disappears, not because circumstances change, but because perception shifts from separation to fullness. The human mind tends to measure abundance by external possessions or visible success, yet divine abundance is not limited to these forms. It is the spiritual energy that manifests as life, breath, beauty, and love. When gratitude becomes the foundation of awareness, every moment glows with divine sufficiency. You no longer look outward for signs of grace, you see that grace is the ground you walk upon. The flow of divine energy cannot enter a consciousness filled with complaint or discontent, for those attitudes deny its existence. Gratitude, on the other hand, affirms what already is. It turns the heart toward recognition, and recognition opens the door to realization. In truth, gratitude is a form of prayer without words. It does not ask, it acknowledges. It does not seek to bring more into life, for it knows that the fullness of life is already here. When you awaken in the morning and sense the quiet rhythm of your own breath, gratitude arises naturally. It is not for something external, it is for being, for awareness itself. This kind of gratitude is a silent communion with the divine, a moment in which the soul whispers, "I see you everywhere." In that seeing, the illusion of lack dissolves, and the flow of divine energy is felt as peace, joy, and effortless supply. Many believe they must wait for things to improve before they can feel grateful, but this is the inversion of spiritual law. Gratitude is not the result of harmony, it is the cause. When you give thanks in the midst of uncertainty, you align your consciousness with divine order. That alignment shifts the energy around you. The external world, being the mirror of inner awareness, begins to reorganize itself in response to the vibration of appreciation. What once seemed delayed or denied begins to unfold with ease, because the resistance has been removed. Gratitude loosens the tight grip of fear and control, allowing divine intelligence to move unobstructed through your experience. Gratitude also softens the heart. It removes the armor of self-pity and opens the eyes to the beauty of the ordinary. The simple sound of wind through trees, the warmth of a friend's voice, the stillness of evening, all become revelations of the divine presence. When you begin to live this way, you realize that the sacred has never been absent. It was only unnoticed. Gratitude restores the ability to see holiness in everything, to sense the pulse of spirit even in what the world calls mundane. This vision lifts you beyond duality, beyond the division between sacred and secular, gain and loss, good and bad. All becomes one movement of divine life, unfolding perfectly. To live in gratitude is to live in faith. It is to trust that every circumstance, even those wrapped in difficulty, carries within it a seed of grace. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" But what truth is this revealing? Gratitude turns adversity into instruction, pain into awakening. It transforms the narrow tunnel of personal desire into the wide horizon of divine vision. When you no longer wait for things to be right before feeling thankful, you discover that they are already right in ways the mind cannot yet comprehend. In this state, gratitude ceases to be a practice and becomes a natural condition of being. It is the song of the soul in tune with its source. Through it, divine energy flows effortlessly, nourishing every aspect of existence, until there is no longer one who gives thanks and one who is thanked. Only the eternal harmony of love, recognizing itself everywhere. Living in present awareness is the quiet art of seeing life as it truly is, unfiltered by memory or expectation. The human mind is forever wandering, rehashing what was or anticipating what might be, and in this ceaseless motion, it misses the only moment where God's flow can be felt now. Divine energy is not found in the past or the future. It exists only in the eternal present, where all creation unfolds. When you live in awareness, each breath becomes a doorway to the infinite, and the ordinary reveals its sacred nature. The past dissolves, the future loses its pull, and consciousness rests in the wholeness of being. Awareness is not concentration, it is receptivity. Concentration narrows attention to a single object, but awareness opens to the totality of what is. It does not exclude sound, sensation, or thought. It simply witnesses them without attachment. In that witnessing, the turbulence of the mind begins to calm, and beneath the surface you sense a still presence, vast and unmoving. This presence is not something you create. It is what remains when all effort ceases. It is divine consciousness itself, silently perceiving through you. When you learn to rest in this state, you realize that awareness is not a practice you perform, it is what you are. The flow of divine energy enters through this awareness because it is free of obstruction. The moment you step outside the present, thinking about what should have been or what might be, you tighten the channel. The mind, in its constant commentary, becomes a veil between you and reality. But when awareness deepens, the veil thins, and everything around you begins to shimmer with life. A simple movement, a sound, or a glance reveals divine intelligence at work. You start to feel that nothing happens by accident, that every experience carries purpose, and that the same presence breathing within you animates all things. Living in awareness is not an escape from responsibility, it is the highest form of participation. When you act from the present, action arises not from compulsion, but from clarity. Decisions made in awareness are infused with wisdom because they come from the source rather than from fear or habit. Life becomes spontaneous and fluid without strain. You are no longer the doer struggling to manage existence, you are the witness through whom divine energy expresses effortlessly. This awareness also transforms your relationship with time. You stop racing to arrive somewhere else, because you realize that every moment is a complete unfolding of eternity. The search for fulfillment ends because fulfillment is recognized as the very fabric of the now. Even in stillness, something profound is moving. Life itself, revealing its perfection moment by moment. The tension that once accompanied delay or uncertainty dissolves, replaced by quiet trust that what needs to unfold will do so at the perfect time. Living in the present also dissolves the illusion of separation. The observer and the observed are seen as one movement of consciousness. You no longer see yourself as an isolated being surrounded by an external world, but as awareness witnessing itself in infinite forms. This recognition brings humility and compassion. You feel connected to all living things because you perceive that the same divine energy animates every heart, every breath, every blade of grass. In that perception, love becomes effortless, no longer an emotion to cultivate, but a state of being that flows naturally when resistance disappears. As awareness deepens, life's rhythm becomes harmonious. You begin to trust the pauses as much as the movements, the silences as much as the sounds. Each instant becomes a prayer without words, an offering of presence to presence. Living this way, you realize that there is no journey to enlightenment, no distance between you and God's flow. There is only awareness, awake and still, through which divine energy reveals itself as the quiet joy of being alive. When the walls of resistance fall, when silence replaces striving, and when gratitude becomes the natural song of your heart, you awaken to the truth that God's flow was never absent. It is not a force that comes and goes, it is the life within life, the invisible rhythm behind every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness. The divine energy you seek has been seeking you only through your own stillness, your surrender, and your openness. As you release judgment, control, and fear, the current of spirit carries you effortlessly, guiding each step without effort or anxiety. You begin to live, not by personal will, but by divine movement. In this sacred alignment, peace ceases to be a goal and becomes your natural atmosphere. You find yourself no longer striving to connect with God, for you realize that you were never apart. And in that realization, life becomes prayer. Every breath a communion, every experience a revelation. The river of divine energy flows through you as you, without interruption or end, quiet, radiant, and eternal.
Before you abandon your spiritual journey forever, let me share what happened to Joel Goldsmith in that quiet hotel room in 1928. He was dying from tuberculosis. Doctors had given up completely, and his faith was utterly shattered. But in that moment of complete surrender and hopelessness, something extraordinary occurred that changed everything he believed about God, healing, and the very nature of reality itself. What Joel discovered wasn't another prayer technique, positive thinking method, or spiritual practice to add to his collection. It was a fundamental shift in consciousness that instantly transformed his dying body into perfect health. This wasn't gradual improvement over months or years. Within just a few hours, his lungs were completely clear, his fever was gone, and his life was totally restored through pure spiritual realization. The secret Joel uncovered that night became the foundation for thousands of documented healings worldwide over the next 4 decades. Students who learned this principle experienced miraculous recoveries from terminal illnesses, financial disasters, and broken relationships. But here's what makes this different from everything else you've tried before in your spiritual search and study. This wasn't another technique to practice or method to master. It was recognition of what had always been true. but hidden from ordinary human perception. Joel realized that every prayer, affirmation, and spiritual technique he had learned was actually working against him by reinforcing the very separation it claimed to heal. Joel realized that every prayer, affirmation, and spiritual technique he had learned was actually working against him in the most fundamental way. He discovered that trying to change conditions through spiritual effort was the very thing blocking his healing and keeping him trapped in limitation. The moment he stopped trying to fix anything and simply recognized a profound truth about his real identity, instantaneous transformation occurred. This revelation completely shattered conventional spiritual thinking that had dominated religious practice for centuries. Joel saw that most people pray to God as if God were separate from them, begging for healing as if they were disconnected from divine power. But in that hotel room, he experienced the shocking truth that the very consciousness reading these words right now is the presence and power of God itself. The problem isn't that God won't heal you or provide for you or answer your prayers. The problem is believing you're separate from God in the first place, which makes every prayer an exercise in reinforcing the very illusion that blocks demonstration. Joel's breakthrough came when he stopped trying to reach God and realized God as his own true being and essence. This shift in identity, not in circumstances, became the key to effortless manifestation and healing that would transform thousands of lives. Joel discovered that changing what you think you are automatically changes what you experience, because consciousness and its expression are one indivisible reality that cannot be separated. Joel spent the next 40 years proving this principle in the most challenging situations imaginable across every continent. Students brought him cases doctors called hopeless, financial situations that seemed completely impossible, and relationship problems that appeared beyond any possibility of repair. Yet through this one realization, breakthrough after breakthrough occurred with stunning consistency and mathematical precision. A woman with advanced cancer was told she had only days to live and should prepare for death immediately. Through Joel's teaching, she recognized her true spiritual identity beyond the physical body and experienced complete healing within just a few weeks. A businessman facing total bankruptcy applied this principle and watched his company transform into unprecedented success beyond his wildest dreams. These weren't isolated incidents or lucky coincidences, but natural results of understanding your real nature as spiritual being. The key Joel discovered is that problems exist only in the belief that you're a separate person struggling against circumstances. When you recognize yourself as divine consciousness appearing as human experience, problems dissolve because the one who seemed to have them never actually existed. This isn't philosophy or metaphysical theory, but practical mysticism with measurable results that can be verified. Joel documented case after case where this recognition produced immediate and lasting transformation in every area of human experience, proving that consciousness aligned with truth automatically demonstrates harmony. Here's the exact realization Joel experienced that night that changed everything about his understanding of spirituality. I am not a human being trying to become spiritual through effort and practice. I am spiritual being expressing as human experience right now. This shift from seeking God to recognizing yourself as God's expression changes everything instantly and permanently without exception. You stop trying to get something from God and start expressing as God's own presence and power in the world. Joel called this recognition dying daily to the personal sense of self. Every time you catch yourself believing you're separate from infinite supply, perfect health, or divine love, you simply return to the truth of your spiritual identity as God's very own consciousness and expression. The miracle isn't that circumstances change, though they often do dramatically and immediately. The miracle is that you discover the one experiencing circumstances has always been the very presence of God, never actually separate, never actually lacking, never actually in danger or threatened by any condition. This understanding becomes your permanent foundation for effortless living. Joel taught that this recognition must become as automatic as breathing, as natural as seeing, as continuous as consciousness itself. The moment you truly understand what you are, every area of your life begins reflecting that understanding through harmonious demonstration that requires no effort or struggle to maintain consistently. Let me share what happened to Margaret, one of Joel's early students who had been bedridden for 3 years with a degenerative muscle condition. Doctors offered absolutely no hope for recovery. and she had tried every spiritual method available without any success whatsoever. When Joel taught her this principle, she initially resisted because it seemed too simple to be true compared to the complex healing techniques she had been practicing. Margaret's breakthrough came during a quiet morning when she stopped trying to heal her body and simply rested in the truth of her spiritual identity beyond physical form. She wasn't Margaret with a diseased body asking God for healing. She was God's own consciousness expressing perfectly, and the body was simply reflection of that perfect spiritual reality that had never been sick or limited. Within 6 months, Margaret was not only walking perfectly, but teaching this principle to others with remarkable success. Her recovery wasn't gradual improvement over time, but a fundamental shift in her understanding of what she actually was. The body responded to this change in consciousness because matter always reflects the level of spiritual understanding we demonstrate consistently. Margaret later said that the hardest part wasn't learning the principle, but accepting that she had always been perfect spiritual being. The illness existed only in false human belief, not in her true identity as God's consciousness. Once she stopped believing in separation from perfection, perfection naturally expressed as her experience. Robert, a successful lawyer, lost everything in a market crash and faced complete financial ruin that seemed absolutely hopeless. He came to Joel's classes desperate for a miracle, but encountered something that initially frustrated him tremendously. Instead of techniques for attracting money or manifesting wealth, Joel taught him to recognize his true identity as the very source and substance of all supply and expression. Robert's transformation began when he stopped seeing himself as a person lacking money and started recognizing himself as infinite abundance appearing in human form. This wasn't positive thinking or mental manipulation, but spiritual realization based on the actual truth of being. He began making decisions from abundance consciousness rather than fear of loss or scarcity thinking. Within 18 months, Robert had not only recovered all his losses but built greater wealth than he had ever experienced before. More importantly, he never again experienced financial anxiety because he understood his true relationship to supply. He discovered that consciousness of abundance creates abundant experience, not the other way around as most people believe. Robert became one of Joel's most successful students, demonstrating that spiritual understanding translates directly into practical results in every area of human experience. He learned that when you know yourself as the source of supply rather than someone seeking supply, demonstration becomes as natural as breathing. Sarah's marriage was ending after 20 years, and she blamed her husband's betrayal for completely destroying her happiness and sense of self-worth. Through Joel's teaching, she discovered something shocking about the nature of relationships and love that revolutionized her entire understanding. She learned that trying to get love from another person was keeping her from experiencing the infinite love that was her very essence. Sarah's healing came when she stopped seeing herself as a person lacking love and started recognizing herself as love itself in expression through individual being. This wasn't about fixing her marriage or changing her husband, but about discovering the source of fulfillment that had always been present as her true nature. She began relating from wholeness rather than need or emotional dependency. Remarkably, as Sarah's consciousness of love expanded and deepened, her husband experienced his own spontaneous transformation without any effort on her part. Their marriage not only healed completely but became deeper and more fulfilling than ever before. Sarah learned that changing her understanding of herself automatically transformed every relationship because she was no longer seeking completion from others. Sarah discovered that love is not something you get from relationships, but something you are that expresses through relationships. When you know yourself as love, every person in your experience reflects that love back to you because consciousness and its reflection are one indivisible reality that cannot be separated. These stories aren't exceptional cases or rare miracles, but natural results when you understand Joel's core teaching about the nature of identity. The principle works because it's based on the actual structure of reality, not human wishful thinking or positive mental attitude. You are not a limited person trying to demonstrate unlimited good. You are unlimited good expressing as apparently limited human experience. Every healing, every demonstration, every transformation occurs through the same recognition. You are divine consciousness appearing as individual being, never separate from the infinite perfection that is your true nature. Problems exist only in false human belief, not in spiritual reality where you actually live and move and have your being as God's very own expression. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover your own spiritual identity, like this video to help others find these life-changing teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom that transforms lives, and comment sharing which healing journey resonated most deeply with your heart. Beyond the core realization, Joel taught specific practices to deepen this understanding in daily life and make it practical for ordinary human experience. The first is what he called spiritual treatment, but not the kind you might expect from traditional religious practice. This isn't asking God to change conditions, but recognizing the truth about what already exists in spiritual reality right now in this moment. When faced with any challenge, instead of trying to solve it from the human level through effort and struggle, you pause and recognize, God doesn't know this problem because God only knows perfection. Since I am God's consciousness in expression, this problem exists only in false human belief, not in my true spiritual reality where only harmony can exist. This recognition dissolves the foundation that seemed to support the problem in the first place. Joel discovered that problems persist because we acknowledge them as real and then try to overcome them through human effort. But when you recognize that infinite perfection is the only reality and you are that reality in expression, problems are revealed as false appearances that dissolve naturally. The key is consistency in this recognition, rather than intensity of effort. Joel taught that small, frequent acknowledgments of spiritual truth create more lasting transformation than occasional dramatic spiritual experiences, followed by return to human limitation thinking and problem-focused consciousness. Another powerful technique Joel taught is called dying to material sense throughout your daily experience. Throughout your day, catch yourself believing you're a material body subject to physical laws, a person with limited resources, or someone who can be hurt by external circumstances. Each time, gently return to recognizing your spiritual identity as God's consciousness in expression. This isn't denying human experience or pretending problems don't exist, but seeing them correctly from spiritual perspective. You're not a mortal being occasionally having spiritual moments during prayer or meditation. You're a spiritual being eternally expressing in what appears as human form. Your body, circumstances, and relationships are all reflection of this spiritual reality, not separate from it. Joel emphasized that this recognition must become as natural as breathing, as automatic as your heartbeat. Every thought that assumes separation from God, every fear that imagines lack or limitation, every worry that pictures yourself as vulnerable becomes an opportunity to remember and return to the truth of your divine nature expressing perfectly right now. The goal isn't to eliminate human experience, but to see it from such a high level of spiritual understanding that it harmonizes naturally without struggle. When consciousness is established in truth, truth expresses automatically through every aspect of your experience without exception. Joel also taught the practice of standing porter at the door of thought as essential spiritual discipline. Since consciousness creates experience, guarding your consciousness from false beliefs becomes the most practical activity you can engage in for transforming your life. This isn't positive thinking, but spiritual discernment based on what's actually true about God and your relationship to God. When thoughts of lack arise, you don't fight them or try to replace them, but recognize, God's supply is infinite, and I am that supply in expression. When thoughts of illness appear, you acknowledge, God's perfection is my true body. When thoughts of separation or conflict emerge, you remember, God's love is my very being, expressing as all beings. This isn't mental manipulation or auto-suggestion, but alignment with spiritual reality that already exists. You're not trying to convince yourself of something false, but remembering what's eternally true. Joel discovered that consciousness aligned with truth automatically expresses as harmonious experience, because matter always reflects the spiritual understanding we maintain consistently. The porter work becomes easier with practice as you develop the ability to recognize false thoughts immediately and return to truth without struggle. Eventually, this spiritual discernment becomes so natural that false beliefs have no power to disturb your peace or influence your demonstrations. The most advanced practice Joel taught is living from the secret place of the Most High continuously. This means conducting your entire life from the recognition that you are divine consciousness, appearing as human experience, not a human being occasionally connecting with divine consciousness through prayer or meditation sessions. From this perspective, every decision comes from infinite wisdom, because you recognize yourself as that wisdom in expression. Every action flows from perfect love, because you know yourself as that love appearing as individual being. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to demonstrate the truth of your spiritual identity, rather than evidence of separation from God. Joel lived this way for 40 years after his healing, and students worldwide learned to do the same with remarkable consistency. This isn't a philosophy to believe or a theory to study, but a reality to experience. The moment you truly recognize yourself as God's own consciousness in expression, your entire life becomes demonstration of that truth through effortless manifestation. This level of living requires complete surrender of the personal sense of self that believes it must figure out solutions and create harmony through human effort. You become a transparency through which divine perfection expresses, rather than a person trying to achieve spiritual demonstration through practice. Many students initially struggle with Joel's teaching because it seems to contradict everything they've learned about the spiritual path from traditional religious instruction. They've been taught to improve themselves, to overcome ego, to become worthy of God's love through good behavior and spiritual practice. But Joel's revelation points to something that dissolves all spiritual effort. You already are what you're seeking to become. The challenge isn't becoming spiritual, but recognizing the spirituality that's already your essential nature beyond all human concepts. The difficulty isn't reaching God, but acknowledging God as your very being. The problem isn't that you're separate from perfection, but that you believe in separation despite never actually experiencing it at any moment of your existence. Students often ask, if I'm already perfect spiritual being, why do I experience problems and limitations? Joel's answer was profound and revolutionary. The one experiencing problems is an illusion of thought, not your true identity. Your real being never experiences lack, illness, or separation, because your real being is wholeness, health, and unity, expressing perfectly always. This understanding eliminates the spiritual seeking that keeps you focused on what you believe you lack, rather than recognizing what you already are. The spiritual path transforms from effort to recognition, from becoming to being, from seeking God to expressing as God's consciousness in the world. Another common obstacle is fear of taking responsibility for being God's expression in human form. Students worry, if I'm divine consciousness, does that mean I created my problems and am responsible for my suffering? Joel taught that this question comes from still believing you're a person who became spiritual, rather than recognizing yourself as spiritual being appearing as person. The truth is that problems exist only in false human belief, not in your actual spiritual identity as God's consciousness. You didn't create them from your true being, and you don't need to solve them through human effort. You need only to stop believing in them by returning to the recognition of what you actually are, God's own perfect consciousness expressing as individual being. This shift eliminates guilt, fear, and the burden of trying to heal or improve yourself through spiritual practice. You discover that healing happens naturally when you stop believing there's anything that needs healing. Demonstration occurs effortlessly when you stop trying to demonstrate and simply be what you already are. Infinite perfection in expression. Joel emphasized that spiritual work isn't about changing yourself, but about recognizing what you've always been beneath all human concepts and beliefs. The moment you truly accept your divine nature, every area of your life begins reflecting that acceptance through harmonious experience. The most persistent challenge students face is what Joel called the activity of the carnal mind, or human reasoning. This is the constant mental commentary that insists you're a limited person facing real problems in a material world governed by physical laws. This voice seems so convincing because it's been your primary identity for so long that it feels completely natural and true. Joel taught that you don't fight this voice or try to overcome it through spiritual effort, but simply stop giving it authority over your experience. Every time it presents evidence of separation, lack, or limitation, you gently return to recognizing your true spiritual identity. This isn't a battle between good and evil, but a choice of which voice you're going to identify with and express from. The carnal mind gradually becomes quieter as you consistently choose to live from spiritual recognition rather than human belief and material reasoning. Eventually, it becomes just background noise that has no power to disturb your peace or influence your demonstrations. You discover the unshakable foundation of consciousness that is your actual identity beneath all mental activity. Joel warned that the carnal mind will present very convincing arguments for why spiritual truth can't be true in your particular situation. The key is learning to recognize these arguments as coming from false identity rather than spiritual wisdom, and choosing truth regardless of how convincing the material evidence appears. Students often wonder how long this transformation takes and when they can expect to see results in their experience. Joel's answer was always the same. It takes as long as it takes you to truly accept what you already are. Some experience instant breakthroughs like Joel did in that hotel room. Others require months or years of consistent practice, but every student who persists eventually experiences undeniable proof of their spiritual identity. The key is consistency rather than intensity in spiritual practice. Joel emphasized daily recognition of your true nature over dramatic spiritual experiences or peak moments. Small, consistent acknowledgments of your divine identity create more lasting transformation than occasional intense spiritual practices, followed by return to human limitation thinking. Joel taught that spiritual progress isn't measured by how often you have mystical experiences, but by how consistently you live from the recognition of your divine nature. The goal is to make spiritual consciousness your normal state, rather than something you access occasionally through prayer or meditation. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak directly to your heart and inspire transformation, like this video to support others finding these teachings, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices that change lives, and comment sharing which obstacle you're ready to transform now. Advanced students learn to live from what Joel called the fourth dimension of life, or pure spiritual consciousness. This is existence from the standpoint where matter, time, and space are recognized as mental constructs rather than governing realities. From this dimension, instantaneous healing and manifestation become natural rather than miraculous because you're operating from the level where these things originate. Joel demonstrated this repeatedly throughout his teaching career with thousands of witnesses. Students witnessed him dissolve storms through recognition of spiritual harmony, heal incurable diseases through acknowledgement of perfect spiritual embodiment, and transform desperate situations through understanding of divine order expressing in human experience without any human intervention or effort. This isn't power over matter, but recognition that matter is consciousness appearing in form, and form has no existence apart from the consciousness that appears as form. When consciousness changes through spiritual understanding, form automatically reflects that change because consciousness and its expression are one indivisible reality that cannot be separated or opposed. Living from the fourth dimension means seeing through material appearances to spiritual reality in every situation. You recognize that what appears as problem is actually opportunity for spiritual demonstration. What appears as limitation is actually invitation to recognize infinite possibility. Living from the fourth dimension means making decisions based on spiritual reality rather than material appearances or human reasoning. Joel taught students to ask in every situation, what would infinite wisdom do? What would perfect love express? How would divine order appear in this circumstance? Then trust that wisdom, love, and order to express through their consciousness without trying to figure out details. This requires releasing the belief that you must figure out solutions through human reasoning and mental effort. Instead, you rest in the recognition that divine intelligence is your very mind, and perfect solutions emerge naturally from that intelligence without mental strain or worry about outcomes. You become a transparency for divine wisdom rather than a person trying to be wise. Students discovered that this approach produces far better results than human planning, while eliminating the stress and anxiety that comes from believing you're personally responsible for creating harmony in your experience. You learn to let divine intelligence think through you rather than trying to think your way to spiritual demonstration. Joel emphasized that this isn't passivity but active cooperation with divine intelligence that knows exactly what needs to happen in every situation. Your role is to maintain spiritual consciousness and trust infinite wisdom to express perfect solutions through that consciousness. Joel's most advanced students learn to see every person and situation from the fourth dimension perspective, rather than human judgment. Instead of relating to others as material beings with human problems and limitations, They recognized everyone as divine consciousness appearing in individual form, regardless of external appearances or behavior patterns that suggested otherwise. This recognition transforms all relationships from human interaction to spiritual communion, where you're relating to the Christ presence in everyone. You stop trying to change others and start seeing the divine nature that is their true identity. Remarkably, this shift in your perception often triggers transformation in others because you're relating to their highest spiritual nature rather than their temporary human condition. Joel taught that this is the ultimate healing work, seeing spiritual perfection everywhere, acknowledging divine presence in everyone, and recognizing God's expression in every situation regardless of appearances. This isn't denial of human experience, but perception from such a high level of consciousness that human experience harmonizes naturally without effort. When you consistently see others from their spiritual identity rather than their human behavior, you become a healing presence that draws out their highest nature. This is how Jesus healed and how every spiritual master throughout history demonstrated transformation in others. The pinnacle of Joel's teaching is what he called living in the Word, or existing in such constant recognition of spiritual truth that your consciousness automatically demonstrates harmony without conscious effort. Your very presence becomes a healing influence wherever you go, because you're established in the recognition of universal perfection, expressing everywhere. Students who achieve this level don't practice spiritual principles. They embody spiritual reality as their natural state of being. They don't treat problems. They recognize the absence of problems in true spiritual existence. They don't manifest good. They express the infinite good that is their essential nature continuously and effortlessly through every thought, word, and action. Joel lived this way for the last decades of his life, and thousands of students experienced healing simply by being in his presence or reading his words. He demonstrated that when consciousness is established in spiritual truth, that truth expresses automatically through every aspect of human experience without exception. This level of spiritual living becomes possible when you completely surrender the personal sense of self that believes it must do something to create harmony. You become so transparent to divine consciousness that it flows through you naturally, blessing everyone and everything in your experience. As you approach mastery of Joel's teaching, you discover something profound about the nature of spiritual work that revolutionizes your entire approach. You realize that you've never actually been a human being learning to become spiritual through effort and practice. You've always been a spiritual being learning to express that spirituality clearly through human experience, without interference from false beliefs. This recognition eliminates the sense of spiritual seeking, because you understand that what you were seeking has always been your essential nature. There's nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, and no one to become. There's only the ongoing recognition and expression of what you eternally are, God's own perfect consciousness appearing as individual being. The spiritual path transforms from effort to recognition, from becoming to being, from seeking God to expressing as God's consciousness in the world. Every day becomes an opportunity to demonstrate more clearly the divine perfection that is your true identity, rather than an attempt to overcome human limitation through spiritual practice. Joel taught that the ultimate spiritual realization is discovering that you are the very thing you've been seeking. God isn't something outside yourself that you must reach or attain. God is your very own consciousness, and spiritual demonstration is simply letting that divine consciousness express naturally without human interference. Joel's ultimate message was that Christ consciousness isn't something that comes to you occasionally during peak spiritual experiences, but something that you are permanently as your true identity. The consciousness reading these words right now is the same consciousness that Jesus demonstrated, that Buddha expressed, that every spiritual master throughout history recognized as their true identity. The only difference between you and the great spiritual teachers is the degree to which you recognize and express this truth consistently in daily life. They weren't special beings with unique divine connection or mystical powers. They were human beings who recognized their divine nature and lived from that recognition regardless of external circumstances or challenges. This understanding democratizes spirituality completely and eliminates spiritual hierarchy or specialness. You don't need special initiation, years of training, or exceptional spiritual gifts. You need only the willingness to recognize what you already are and to live from that recognition with increasing consistency and clarity every day. Joel proved that any person willing to accept their divine nature can demonstrate the same healing, supply, and harmony that characterized the lives of history's greatest spiritual teachers. The Christ is not a person, but consciousness, and that consciousness is equally present as every individual being. The practical result of Joel's teaching is a life of effortless harmony where problems dissolve before they fully form, where supply appears before you recognize the need, where healing occurs naturally because there's never been anything that needed healing in your true spiritual identity as God's perfect expression. This isn't a fantasy or spiritual ideal, but the natural expression of consciousness aligned with truth about its own nature. When you know yourself as divine consciousness appearing as human experience, that consciousness automatically expresses as perfect health, abundant supply, harmonious relationships, and joyful living, because these are its natural qualities that cannot be suppressed or limited. Students worldwide continue to demonstrate this truth more than 40 years after Joel's passing, proving that his teaching points to eternal spiritual principles rather than personal charisma or temporary methods. The truth he discovered is available to every consciousness willing to recognize and accept its divine nature. Joel's legacy isn't a new religion or spiritual system, but the rediscovery of what every human being actually is beneath all concepts and beliefs about limitation. His teaching removes everything that seems to stand between you and direct experience of your divine nature. Before you give up on spirituality forever, remember Joel's profound realization in that hotel room that changed everything. You are not seeking God because you are not separate from God. You are God's own consciousness appearing as individual being, expressing perfectly in every moment, regardless of external appearances or temporary human conditions that suggest otherwise. This recognition doesn't require faith, belief, or spiritual effort to make it true. It requires only the willingness to stop believing in separation and to acknowledge what has always been true. You are divine being having a human experience, not human being occasionally connecting with divine presence through prayer or spiritual practice. The moment you truly accept this truth about yourself, every area of your life begins reflecting that acceptance through harmonious demonstration. You discover that you are the very presence and power you've been seeking, and that everything you need for perfect living is already established in consciousness as your divine inheritance. If your spiritual understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets and you're ready to live from your true identity, like this video to help others discover their divine nature. Subscribe for more transformative teachings that change lives, and comment "I am transformed" to confirm your commitment to living from spiritual truth.